A very good morning to all of you. A very warm welcome on Saturday morning. Only with healthy ecosystems we can enhance people's livelihoods, counteract climate change, and stop biodiversity collapse. Every year on 5th June, the world celebrates World Environment Day to bring positive changes. World Environment Day offers a global platform for inspiring positive change in the
This year's
environment.
theme for World Environment Day
It
is
pushes
ecosystem
individuals to
restoration,
think about the way they consume the
which actually
ecosystem
means
and gives them a chance to
preventing,
take
halting,
action
and
to
reversing
build
the damage
a
caused
greener
by human
future.
activities, and
In
finally,
1972,
healing
the
our
United
nature.
Nations General
And
Assembly
this
designated June
World
5th as the
Environment Day
World
in
Environment
2021
Day, and
will
since
also
then,
see
every
the
year,
launch of the UN
governments,
Decade
big
on
businesses, and
Ecosystem
citizens around the globe
Restoration.
put in their efforts to address
Every three
environmental
seconds, the
issues.
world loses
This year, too,
plenty of
millions
forests,
of people
and
around
over
the
the last
world will be
century,
celebrating
we
this
have
day
destroyed half of
peacefully.
our wetlands.
This year's mission is to revive billions of hectares from forests to farmlands and also cover the mountains and deep water oceans. World Environment Day is hosted by different countries around the globe. It has a participation of over 143 countries annually. This year, Pakistan will host the World Environment Day in collaboration with UN Environment Programme, UNEP. In the last 1 year and counting, we have just survived and are trying to survive. Why are we in this situation? Due to China? Though that might be fractionally true, there is much more to it. We all somewhat know, but pretend to not know how imbalances in the equilibrium of an ecosystem can result in both infectious and non-infectious diseases. Many current animal and human health challenges are linked to these activities, and addressing these requires an interdisciplinary approach. Today, we have two eminent speakers, Mr. Claude Alvarez, an environmentalist from Goa, and Ms. Malini Shankar, an environmental journalist. A very warm welcome to Mr. Claude and Ms. Malini. Welcome, Mr. Claude,
Thank you.
and welcome, Malini, to our show. Now, let us hear from them today more about this in detail. To begin with, let me introduce our esteemed guest, Mr. Claude Alvarez. He is the director of Goa Foundation for over 30 years, editor of other Indian Press, and coordinator of the Multiversity Project. He was formerly director of Organic Farming Association of India for over 10 years, and he's written Decolonizing History, Science, Development, and Violence, Fish Curry and Rice, a source book on Goa's environment, and the Organic Farming Source Book, in addition to editing a book on decolonizing the university. He considers himself a political activist and street fighter, but as head of the Goa Foundation has also filed over 300 PILs on environmental issues in the High Court, National Green Tribunal, and the Supreme Court of India. The most recent PILs brought the environmentally destructive mining industry in Goa to a complete halt now for over 5 years. The mining case led to Goa getting a Goa Iron Ore Permanent Fund, where miners must deposit 10% of the value of their ore invoices for the benefit of future generations. This is the country's first intergenerational equity fund. Mr. Alvarez believes that the imported industrial model and its natural and inherent quality of generating pollutants and waste, in addition to its unquestioned capacity to degrade the natural environment, is the principal threat to public health today. Lesser attention is paid to the equally hazardous imported agricultural model, which is permitted, which is premised on the assumption that people can eat poisonous food, provided the toxins in the food are below the limits that experts prescribe. After his marriage and move to Goa, Mr. Mr. Alvarez has consciously avoided urban life, like Goan architect Kamlakar Sadale or former film producer Mansoor Khan. He has preferred the simpler, rustic life, growing his own food and eggs organically, composting house waste, and generating solar power for the grid, consciously decreasing one's dependence on urban-based economy and infrastructure may be the key to most if they wish to regain health, sanity, and contentment. But these must be lobbied for at the level of society and politics, and not in one's own backyard. Over to you, sir, Claude, sir. Please, I invite you to make a presentation and enlighten our participants. So you are on mute, sir.
Yeah, now
fine.
is it open? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. So I am very happy to speak to you people today on this occasion of World Environment Day, because this is the only one day on which people are willing to listen to us. And on the other days, they listen to bureaucrats and politicians and scientists and planners and project developers and so on. And on one day, we are supposed to speak of ecosystem restoration, and on the other days, we are supposed to speak of restoration destruction. That is 364 days. So these are the contradictions of modern life. And Malini, being a journalist, will also be in grand sympathy with what I'm saying. We have reduced ourselves to some form of tokenism. One day for the environment, the rest of the year to continue with our relentless assault on the environment, on the natural environment, on wildlife, on forests, and so on. And at least as far as my experience goes, in the last decade, we have had more of this than when I was a child and when I was growing up and when I was going to college and much before I came to Goa in 1977. The world was not as bad and as relentless as this. And I do not know, and I'm extremely thankful, as a matter of fact, to this. I'm extremely thankful to this extremely small virus which we do not see, which has brought the entire world and its economy to its knees, and also given us and nature a respite from the unbridled assault, on everything that we have come to associate with the good life, with peaceful life, with happiness, with contentment, and with good health. It is, I think, there's not a single person, whether he's educated or uneducated, whether he's got a PhD or whatever, who will not agree that if you don't have a good environment, you are never going to get good health. But for some reason, we are willing to accept that we can continue to pollute our environment and continue to damage nature and continue to remove our forests, and miraculously we will get good health. You cannot disconnect the two. You disconnect the two, you are living in an unreal world. Like Delhi has learned. Delhi city has learned that you disconnect the two, you can't survive. And so you can imagine the condition of people in Delhi, particularly in the months of November and December and January, when it becomes positively an unsafe environment in which to live, where the entire next generation gets afflicted with all types of chronic respiratory diseases, which they will have to use and survive for the rest of their lives. So everybody knows that there's a connection. One has to go with the other. And that is why many years ago, both my wife and I myself, both of us who are supposed to be highly educated in terms of today's degree chasing populations, we decided a long time back to get out of the hellhole of Bombay, when it was still very good. It was a very nice city, just like Bangalore was in the 60s and 70s. You could live in these cities. Today that's not possible, and we made a very wise decision at that time to get out in search of good air and in search of good water. And that's what we found in Goa in 1977. And we have more or less tried to remain at that level, living always in a rural area, living always in a village. For the last 40 years, we have lived only in village. We have not lived in the city, and we refuse to live in the city. If you give us a 5 crore flat in Bangalore, we will almost without a thought reject it. We have no interest in staying in Delhi or Mumbai, and we have no interest in being gassed to death in these terrible environments. We have found, as a matter of fact, and this is our recommendation to many of our friends, even now in Delhi and all these other places, you don't require to live in a city anymore, because the city is no longer a natural ecosystem. It is an ecosystem of concrete, paved pathways and footways and roads, which do not even allow the dust particles to settle, because the continuous traffic keeps putting them back into the air and back into your lungs. So the city is not a natural ecosystem. It's an artificial ecosystem. It's not even an ecosystem. It's something else. It's something that we have created. And we don't even know whether we have consciously created it or whether we have created it as some sort of an escape hatch, because we are not able to solve the problems with imagination, creativity, and honesty. So we get all these people coming, leaving their environments wherever they are and coming and congregating there and hoping to get a better life. But the result is today, the cities have become really obnoxious environments for everything, from food to travel to peace of mind to visual pollution to light pollution to being able to sleep with your eyes closed without it being impacted by artificial light. All my doctor friends told me long time back that if you cannot sleep in perfect darkness, you will be unhealthy for the rest of your life. And if you cannot walk, your circulation system will always be in a state of disrepair, because walking is essential for the blood to flow through your system. So if you don't have clean air and you don't have the capacity to walk, you are automatically in a state of disrepair. And it is no wonder that in today's crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, this has come back with full force. I'm not saying that healthy people have not died in the COVID crisis. But if you look at all the figures, it is largely the unhealthy people who have gone first. What they call the people with comorbidities, they use all these fancy terms. But basically what they are telling people is, you're not in a state of good health. Here you get the first parking lot ticket to get out of circulation. You got diabetes, nothing can save you. You got high blood pressure, nothing can save you. You've got no oxygen in your blood because you're sitting there in front of a computer 8 hours a day and another 6 hours in front of the TV, and your oxygen level has come down. There's no chance for you. It's time for you to go. And therefore, this message coming on World Environment Day is actually historic, because it says we don't care a damn for your economy, and we don't care a damn for your vaccines, and we don't care a damn for anything. If your own personal ecosystem is not in good shape, it's time for you to go. As I said, I'm not saying that healthy people have not gone. Some healthy people have also gone because they made, yesterday we have heard the news that the chairman of Indigo Airlines has gone. He had COVID, but within 3 weeks he started to cycle again. And he suffered a heart attack on the cycle and he's gone. So even those who have got out of COVID don't stand much of a chance if they don't allow themselves a chance to recover. It's the same with nature, we are finding. You don't give nature a chance to recover and you go on assaulting it relentlessly. There's not much chance that you can do to undo the damage that nature will unleash just in one day, like it did with the Taukte cyclone in the state all along the coast from Kerala up to Gujarat. The havoc it caused. Now the scientists telling us that these cyclones, which were a permanent feature of the East Coast, are now going to become a permanent feature of the West Coast because of the damage that we have done to the planet's environment, to its climate, and something from which we have to now, just like these silly vaccines that they are trying to impose on everybody, we are going to have to really deal. We are going to have to construct things that we never thought of before. We are going to have to think in terms of constructing cyclone shelters all along the coast, because this is going to be now something that's going to be part of our way of life for who knows how many more decades. Now, ecosystem restoration is a very big word. As I said, it makes sense to talk about it if you have stopped the process of ecosystem damage. Now, as I said, there is no real sign of that at all. And unless the professionals, beginning from engineers, architects, project planners, take a vow today that they will not generate projects which harm the natural environment, I would class them not as dishonest professionals, but as third-class professionals or as 10th-class professionals. My only criterion right now, and I'm speaking from the point of view of the coming generations and intergenerational equity, which is what we work on most of the time, is that if you are an architect or you are a professional or you are an engineer or you are a project planner and you cannot design your project without damaging the forest, the water body, or the air, the natural vegetation, then please forsake this profession and go and sit on the sidewalk in Bangalore and sell flowers. Just get out from this profession. This planet cannot suffer you anymore. It's time for you to go. Just like Corona is telling people who are totally, in unfit state of health, go. This is our advice to you today. If you consider yourself professional and you want to consider yourself a first-rate professional on duty to the planet in its present state of distress, then please tell us that you have taken this vow that you will not design any more projects which are going to damage the planet and its natural resources. If you can't give that commitment, as I said, get out of this profession and leave it to those who can do this. We don't need large numbers of projects, of large projects. We need a few projects which can show people the way. And many of these things don't require a lot of money. They require only good sense. I can give you as a classic case what is happening in the forestry sector in India. In India, if you want to cut an hectare of forest, you got to pay what is known as the net present value. That is the ecological contribution of that forest. And you got to pay for the cost of compensatory afforestation. Now, so many forests have been destroyed in the country because of this principle followed by the central government. Today we have more than 80,000 crores in public sector banks, which are the monies we have earned from destroying natural forests for development projects. This money has been rotting in the banks for more than 10 years, only accumulating interest. And if you go to Karnataka Forest Department website, you go to Goa website, you go to Madhya Pradesh website, Forest Department, you will find that all the money is there, but no work is being done. In Goa, we have got 100 crores for compensatory afforestation. Over 10 years lying in the bank, with the central government has refused to send any more money because they said you are not able to spend 100 crores. Why should we send you any more money? So money is not the solution. Money is available. Forest department is there. They have got staff. But this is not their priority. Their priority is visiting areas where they can certify that you can destroy this forest provided you pay more NPV and compensatory afforestation. That is their job. These are forest bureaucrats. They sit in the offices and they calculate, you want to destroy this forest for this project, irrigation project, for this building, for that mining project, whatever it is, please sir, you pay. And after they pay, they get the money and they don't know how, because they are not interested in compensatory afforestation for the simple reason that all the compensatory afforestation they know is a joke, because you cannot reforest. The lesson that we have learned from nature is that a forest will grow on its own, provided you allow nature to regenerate on its own. The best forests come up in 14 years. This is actually a law of nature. In 14 years, if you allow a plot of land not to do anything and with no interference from human beings, and you put it under a fence, you will find that after 14 years, you will have a natural forest growing on it. Because nature knows how to create forests. Human beings don't. Human beings know how to create plantations. They will put eucalyptus, they will put acacia in straight lines and say, Baba, this is a forest. And foresters know in their heart of hearts that this is not a forest. So I think in the end, they say, why do we want to cheat the public? Let the money remain in the bank till somebody knows what to do with all this money. The result is every year the central government gives permission for more and more forests to be decided. And the classic case is in Mole National Park and Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary, which is Goa's oldest. It is, I think, probably 10 million years old. And the Goa government and the National Committee for the Standing Committee for the National Board of Wildlife and all these so-called authorities give permission for 3 infrastructure projects to grow right through the sanctuary. Electricity lines through the sanctuary. National highway viaduct through the wildlife sanctuary. Additional railway line through the sanctuary. And we said, what is this? Who is taking these decisions? Why are you today, in today's world, continuing to destroy the natural environment? Where are your engineers? Why could they not design these projects in such a way that they did not have to go through these sanctuaries? Why do they have to go through the wildlife sanctuaries and national parks? Who put it into their head that they can continue to destroy? It's the forest department and the government which tells them, well, we give you permission. But who is the government to give you permission to destroy a wildlife sanctuary? The wildlife sanctuary doesn't belong to the government. The forest doesn't belong to the government. These are natural resources belonging to the whole country. They belong to the people of the country. The natural resources are available. They are in the management, the trustee management of the central government. The government is supposed to look after them as trustees on behalf of this generation and future generations. The government pretends as though it is its own private property and says, no, we give you this permission, you just give us the money. So they said for forest destruction, the rate is this much. If you want to destroy a wildlife sanctuary, the rate is 5 times more. If you want to destroy a national park, the rate is 10 times more. This is the way in which the central government conducts itself. Anybody who has got brains like this is not supposed to be running a government. I don't know what it is supposed to be running, but it should not be supposed running a government, because if you have governments like this, they will ruin the entire country and they will convert everything into cash. And then they'll give the cash to banks. And of course, the banks, you know, where the money will go to people who will misuse it and then catch the fastest possible flight and go to London, where you will then spend crores of rupees trying to get them back. But this is our situation today. You as professionals have to take a vow that either you get out of this profession or you don't collaborate any further. And if you are in the employment of a corporation, you tell the corporation bosses, you have hired me, you give me a project, I will try and work it out in such a way that I do not damage the natural environment, certainly not a forest, certainly not a reserve forest, and certainly not a protected forest, and certainly not a wildlife sanctuary, and least of all, a tiger reserve or a national park. We will not allow. And I will support, even though I'm working in an organization, I will support all the environmentalists, and I will also support all those writers and journalists and everybody who are waging war against these projects, because today we cannot anymore allow this type of destruction to continue to take place. This is the only message that I want to give to people today on World Environment Day, that this is, as I said, we have to give up this approach that on this day we talk about the environment and the rest of the days we continue to figure out how we collaborate in destroying it. And I can tell you, we do it even in my own way. I may try to look after my own garbage, and I try to grow my own food, and I try to also generate some power and supply it to the grid, and I do whatever I can do, and I try to live in a natural surrounding. I don't use an air conditioner because I know what air conditioners require. I believe in pure air, and in Goa I can still get in my village 100% pure air. I cannot get 100% pure air in Vasco, Panji, or Mapsa, because of the traffic and because of the pollutants. Suspended solids PM 2.5 and PM 10 are in excess in all 5 Goan cities. But I can get it in my village. And that is why I remain in my village. And in this COVID times, I have remained only in the village, and I have refused to come out to any other place. Because your primary duty is to your ecosystem. And to bring it back again to that discussion, do not go to see how you can save the planet. If you can see how you can restore your own ecosystem, then maybe you will realize that the way out is not to live in polluted cities or highly dense cities, to get out, to move back into rural areas. The internet, whatever it is assisting this, so you can easily make use of these facilities. You do not have to live anymore in cities for these type of jobs. You can go and migrate. The whole of Goa is filled up with people from Bombay and Pune and Bangalore, because they find it cheaper to stay here and work at home rather than to stay in Bangalore or whatever it is. So this is a very workable model. People of your professionalism can travel anywhere, can get work anywhere, can do anything on this. So you don't need to live in these type of cities, and you can certainly look after your health by getting out of them. And once you're after them, you have to look after your health. You have to do pranayam every day. There's no choice for you. If you don't do pranayam every day, there's no choice. This is not some hoary Indian tradition. If some Westerner tells you to do deep breathing, you will do, but you will not do pranayam. This is very foolish. You have to learn to do Kapalbhati and Kumbha, all these places you have to be able to do. And if you cannot do them, then already remember that you are going to be a victim to the COVID virus, whether you like it or not. You have got to be in tip-top shape. You have to walk. You have to give up this bloody car of yours. If you can find a place where you can work, where you can walk to it, even better. If you don't have to walk to it, also better. But if you can be in this type of an environment where you can do these things, these are very basic common sense things. We have lost our common sense. We are not, for example, able to sense that if something is burning our eyes, that there is a pollutant in the air. No, we say ask the pollution control board to do monitoring to find out whether there is excess pollutants in the air. But God gave you all these senses because through the senses you know. When you cannot taste food anymore, you know you got COVID. When your skin is itching, you know that there is pollutants in the air or that you have drunk some. When your eyes are burning, you know that there is pollutants in it. Why do you need a pollution control board to tell you that? In the village, we don't have all these problems. So automatically you are in a better state of good health. You are giving your system a chance. In that, you then begin to be a good environmentalist because you realize what is the value of good air and good water and what is the value of the trees that are protecting you and providing you with food. If you are only going to the mall every day and buying your food and your stuff which you get in your milk and so on, then how do you appreciate these things and how do you fight for these things? There are already entire generation of people who feel that children feel that the milk is coming from the fridge and not from the cow. How do you get these relationships established? The city has cut all these relationships. They have cut all the recycling relationship. There is nothing that is being recycled in the city except plastic. Otherwise, everything else is gone, is chucked, throw away, whatever. In our village, we recycle everything. The leaves are recycled. In the city, the leaves are burnt. Every house in Bangalore feels that the leaf is a pollutant. How can this leaf, which is the symbol of recycling in nature, how can it be considered a pollutant? Something that disturbs your aesthetic sense. So you got to get out of this mold. You got to get out of an environment where your children look on mud as dirt, look on soil as dirt. No, you come into the house. Why you come with your dirty feet? This is not dirty feet. This is the soil which is giving you your food. So if you have taught your children that this is dirt, then you are living on some lunar planet. That's the only environment for you to be supplied with food in form of fridge or from a mall, because you don't understand that food is coming from soil. And without the soil, if the soil doesn't function properly, we are all dead. So I will halt at this stage. I don't like to talk too much. And besides this one, Malini is there also to talk to us. And then we can have a conversation later on these issues. But thank you very much for listening to me. I'm not willing to leave you all in a ditch wherever you are and say that no, you go and suffer and die from COVID and we are safe. It's a common problem. We have all to look after each other. And the only advice that I can give, as I said, is first look after yourself, then look after your most immediate environment and let the planet look after itself, because at that level you cannot really do very much. Thank you.
Over to you, Neelam. Unmute yourself, Neelam.
Thank you, Mr. Claude. I think that was a very inspirational, enlightening talk. Common sense is the most uncommon thing to be found anywhere. And I think that's what has been causing all these problems that we have around us. And actually, just to let you know, these simple talks that we had started last year is actually addressing this common man, that, every common man, what he can do at his own level to small changes in his own lifestyle, which can have a cumulative effect on the environment together. And that was the idea with which this Hindi mein sadharan baatein, simple talk, which is like sadharan baatein, mean Paris, agreement of COP 25, 30, even 40, 50
Paris
cannot
Agreement was COP
solve the
21.
environment problem. It is the common man on the street. The common man on the street, unless until he is enlightened and he knows, and he is willing to do something about it. And as you rightly said, COVID has forced us to realize what is the first thing which is important to us. I think that's we should be very thankful to COVID for trying to bring some common sense into the public. And thank you for bringing it forward. Thank you so much, sir. We will get back to you again on the question answer session we have after Malini's presentation. Okay, so now we have Ms. Malini Shankar. I'm really delighted to give her bio, which is she's been a friend for a very long time, and we have been in touch and discussing with her, all about environment. I think for the last 6-7 months or 1 year, she's a freelance environmental photojournalist, nature photographer, radio and TV producer from Bangalore, India. She opted to freelance as she wanted to specialize in subjects like environment and wildlife, earth sciences, etc., which are close to her heart. She has specialized in writing about anthropogenic environmental conflict in the Western Ghats, pertaining to indigenous people, solid waste management, sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, and so on. She's also written extensively about the impact of the Asian tsunami in the Andamans and Nicobar Islands, Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. In fact, she wrote a whole picture ebook on that issue. She has undertaken photo shoots in India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Kenya. She has traveled very widely across the planet, visiting 38 countries in the last 2.5 decades, 25 years. She has written about freshwater pollution, anthropogenic conflict in the Western Ghats, the impact of the Asian tsunami, the Sariska slaughter of 22 tigers, best practices in waste management, the European standards of plastic ban, recycling, standardization, indigenous people in India, etc. Malini has covered 5 United Nations conclave as an accredited correspondent, which is a rare honor for a freelance journalist. She has made films for the UN summits and written extensively for curtain raisers. She thrives and revels in the challenge of the steep learning curve that a career in the media offers. She is a foreign correspondent of FAO funded Inter News Agency in 11-minute film for an FOA summit in Peru on the subject of legislative perspectives of food security in Asia. It can be accessed, we will be sharing the link with you, the story of the food security for indigenous people in India. She also made curtain raiser films for the 2012 Rio Plus 20 summit and the launch of SDGs in 2015. And for the launch of Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, she made another film. She was one of the first journalists in India to set the trend in environmental reporting, setting the bars in research very high in lesser known, lesser trodden, and lesser reported areas. A very warm welcome, Malini. Please take the stage.
Thank you. Thank you for a very kind-hearted introduction. Neelam is my sister. She has become my sister in the past 1 year, and she's been a guru also. And Mr. Alvarez, thank you so much for being the elder statesman in today's talk. I haven't met you in 22 years, but I'm happy that my presentation will complement your very inspirational speech. That's all I can say with closed eyes, sincerity, Where is he? I can't see him because I need to express my gratitude to him. Anyway, I would like to dwell, like I said, like Mr. Alvarez was also saying, 5th June or the World Environment Day. Hi. World Environment Day is a day for almost the whole world's population to pay lip service to the cause of the environment. We need to take it further. much farther. We need to put it into practice. I will dwell on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points maybe. Uh, the thing is, we need policy support for mitigation of biodiversity loss. Now, these are huge technical words. It was first, I think, introduced in Rio Summit in 1992 and again stressed in 2002 in the Johannesburg World Summit for Sustainable Development. It means political and legislative supports to mitigate biodiversity loss. That means to stop biodiversity loss or to stop deforestation. For that, we need to increase the protected area network. And for that, we need to, apart from the protected area network, we need to give legal protection to more protected areas, or call them sanctuaries, wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, tiger reserves, conservation areas, whatever they are. So that's one thing that needs to be done. For that, the political leadership needs to be impressed about the need for mitigating biodiversity loss. It's very easy. It's easier for them to give compliance orders through the environmental protection laws. And then, like Mr. Alvarez was saying, compensatory afforestation fund is a complete farce. You can allow mining companies to get away by getting grants for mining in highly protected areas by, asking them to make a compensatory afforestation fund, which is absolutely ridiculous, and it blows in the eyes of conservation, so to say. So that is something that needs to be impressed upon the political leadership. I don't care which party is in power, but all the politicians, without exception, are unscrupulous opportunists, and they need to be really impressed hard about this. When they come for voting, you should tell them this. I think I'm without mincing words, I tell them to take a walk, and I don't bat an eyelid to vote for Nota. That is none of the above. But they deserve the contempt they get, I think. That this is how emotional I get, and I become breathless. Eco restoration needs political support. Now, again, eco restoration is again a pompous word. It could be restoring the forest areas, like Mr. Alvarez was saying. If you just let it be, inviolate, it will regenerate itself. Or there was an experiment in Nepal where somebody planted 12 peepal trees or ficus trees, bodhi trees. It became a forest over a period of 12 to 15 years, because that's how the ecosystem works. And if it's a ficus tree or a banyan tree or a bodhi tree, the aerial roots will come and prop up, and then they spread, and the birds will do the rest. So birds and the bees will do the rest. So you just need land use policy, redefinition of land use policy. So that is why one thing. And I think I need to before we go to the next topic, I would like you to, I will share a link with you. It's an 11-minute film I did for the FAO. I'll give you this link, and then we shall proceed. How sustainable, shall I say, solutions can be found. So I need to, where was that note? I would like you to see this film. It's about 11 minutes. Can I share this link here, Neelam?
Yeah, Sagar, I
I'll
think we
just
have
share
given
this
permission.
link here. I would like this to be played here. It's an 11-minute film. And after that, we shall proceed.
Sagar?
Yeah, just on it, ma'am.
Yeah, okay.
mangroves in estuarine areas would one day guarantee food security to some starving indigenous people of India. Despite political will and an elaborate public distribution system, corruption, mismanagement, and food stocks and hoarding had not allowed effective delivery of food grains to the ones who needed it the most, the marginalized, impoverished, and indigenous people in India. The mangroves caught the serious attention of scientists only when it effectively reduced the power of the Asian tsunami over these creeks, saving the lives of thousands of Irula tribes in the hinterland. Thousands of people died during the tsunami, but in Cuddalore district, the mangroves protected the villages in the hinterland from the tsunami waves which hurtled inland at terrorizing pace. The Irulas were extremely impoverished hunter-gatherer tribes living in small hutments deep inside the mangrove forests in Pichavaram. They were eking out a hand-to-mouth existence hunting rats and snakes in agricultural fields. They lacked food security and livelihood security, and starvation was a real possibility when the Asian tsunami struck.
We Irulas have been hunter-gatherers from time immemorial, yes. But over the centuries, hunting rats and killing snakes became utterly untenable, at least economically. As we were engaged in agricultural labor, we were often asked to hunt for rats, bandicoots, and other such pests. We used to hunt rats, kill snakes, and either sell their poison or skins, or kill the rats, roast it, and eat it. Gradually, this became so challenging that we could get rat meat, our staple food, only once or twice a week, and we were largely on the brink of starvation. After the Asian tsunami, the then collector of Cuddalore, Mr. G.S. Bedi, included the Irulas in the scheduled tribe list so that we can at least avail of benefits of government schemes. Then, our standard of living improved and we had food security for the first time in generations.
Professor M.S. Swaminathan, universally known as the father of the Green Revolution in India, former member of the upper house of Indian Parliament, told IPS exclusively in a Skype interview,
a very important change which has taken place in our country in the last 10 to 15 years is a shift from a patronage approach to a rights approach. The right to food, the right to education, the right to employment, the right to use biodiversity. A whole series of rights issues have come, and one of the important ones here is the National Food Security Act 2013, which makes it legal access to food a fundamental right to nearly 70 to 80% of our population. The National Food Security legislation has several important features. For example, the eldest woman in the household will be the person who is entitled to the food, thereby recognizing the critical role of women in managing household food security. The Act also provides that we should enlarge our food basket, not only wheat and rice in the public distribution system, but a whole variety of nutrient millets.
When the Biodiversity Act was legislated in India in 2002, it was understood only by the intellectual class, but it proved to be the savior for the Irulas. Without livelihood skills, it seemed the fate of the Irulas and many other indigenous peoples was irrevocably linked to poverty. The ecological role of mangroves proved its critical efficacy during and after the Asian tsunami. In the aftermath of the tsunami, when scientists studied their ecological role, it emerged that the mangroves are critical for food security too. These biodiverse mangroves decrease salinity in the groundwater table when planted in the fishbone pattern because they refurbish the tidal cycles in the coastal ecosystem. The mangroves nurture saline-resistant multiple varieties of rice cultivation in the hinterland. They fix nitrogen in the soil, supporting cultivation of pulses in the hinterland, amply justifying the epithet ecotechnologies. Intertidal ecosystem also nurtures fish diversity, giving the Irulas sumptuous food for the first time in history. The MS Swaminathan Research Foundation took up livelihood training for these illiterate and disempowered outcasts. As a signatory of the Food and Agricultural Organization and volunteer state under the Committee of Food Security, India introduced the Food Security Bill against Economists' Council. The Food Security Act of 2013 in India is perhaps the singular and the greatest legislative contribution to humanity in terms of food security. The Biodiversity Act propagates plant and animal genetics, thereby assuring the farmer's livelihood security. The Forest Rights Act of 2006 assures the marginalized forest dwellers nutrition and food security along with biodiversity conservation. The National Rural Employment Guarantee Act assures the rural populace of a minimum standard of wages and a minimum period of employment.
I do not want to recall those days of despair before being enlisted as scheduled tribes. Our children suffered from chronic infections and diseases plagued our tribe. We had no clean water, sanitation was unheard of, we had no clothes to wear, no food to eat, and making two ends meet was such a challenge. I do not wish it for the worst enemy. I am illiterate, but inclusion in the scheduled tribes list nevertheless made it possible to become citizens. That helped us in one stroke to utilize state support. We Irulas used to occasionally indulge in hand fishing, picking up fish from the creeks to supplement our food, because hunting rats gave us food only once or twice a week. We could not afford to buy food. It used to be miserable those days because we did not have the skills for net fishing on boats. Once, the then collector of Cuddalore, Mr. G.S. Bedi, included us in the scheduled tribe list, our lot improved. Then, with the intervention of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, we learned fishing with nets. We learned how to weave fishing nets, oar fishing, boating, and other fishing skills. We also learned how to trap crabs, how to deploy crab traps, undertake aquaculture, and how to utilize crab fattening devices. We learned to plant mangroves in a fishbone pattern which brought intertidal coastal ecosystem to our doorstep, increasing our food consumption.
The Irulas are permitted to farm protein-rich oysters in these creeks thanks to the Forest Rights Act and Food Security Act in India. It is an eminently replicable and ecologically sustainable game changer to defeat hunger and malnourishment in the emerging nations of the South. Bangladesh, for instance, is the global theater of climate change. With the increase in hydrometeorological disasters like cyclones, coastal incursion, and sea level rise, people in Bangladesh are threatened with loss of lives, livelihoods, livestock, and landscape. Mangroves conservation in the Sundarbans protects coastal dwellers in Bangladesh from the impact of climate change and assures the impoverished nation of food security. The island states of the Pacific Ocean rim like Micronesia, French Polynesia, the Philippines, and the Indian Ocean rim states like Indonesia, Seychelles, Maldives, and the Reunion Islands are also very vulnerable to seismic and volcanic triggers of tsunami. And they are also very vulnerable to cyclones, sea level rise, floods, storms, squalls, and the like. Such calamities affect the food security of the islanders. Mangroves conservation can be a game changer in delivering food security to many a malnourished islander in the island states. To the credit of Indian democracy, Indian parliamentarians from different political parties have legislated a whole bunch of laws. Food Security Act that guarantees food security to the starving few, The Biodiversity Act supports biodiversity conservation, which has supported agrodiversity and thereby the livelihood security of the farmers. The Forest Rights Act protects the right to lives and livelihoods of forest-dwelling tribes. The National Rural Employment Guarantee Act guarantees sustainable employment and the right to livelihood. Additionally, the Disaster Management Act empowered the state to take expedient measures to help vulnerable communities to reduce disaster risk in the aftermath of future calamities. With Assistant Camera Person Ravi Kumar in Pichavaram, Kadalur, district of Tamil Nadu, I am Malini Shankar reporting for the Interpress News Service. Okay. Okay, maybe we can stop this now.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for playing that for me, Neelam and Sagar, I think. I will just briefly touch up on the three more topics that I wanted to speak about, but for lack of time, I will cover it in the discussion. Well, eco-restoration needs political support. For that, it includes mining restoration. And for that, again, Mr. Alvarez was mentioning, composting at home is not enough. You need to make our compost, the result of our compost, as a common property resource so that it can be used as mulch to restore mining areas. Okay, that's one thing. Just one thought. Then post-COVID era needs specific spatial needs. That means we need to have a lot of cross ventilation, fresh air, natural lighting, and enough space for not more than 2-3 people to sit in one room at 2 meters distance. So that again needs typical planning, and traditional architecture will come into focus there, because our Indian traditional architecture has things like a central courtyard open to the sky, which gives us a lot of sunlight and fresh air and circulation of fresh air too. It also gives us cross ventilation, something for Neelam to speak about. Urban restoration, we need to focus on wetland restoration, urban forestry, urban wildlife, land use policy. And when I'm talking of land use policy, it's not just 33% of forest cover for Indian subcontinent. I would practice it at my level. For example, I'm building my house next year, and it's a small 50 by 80 plot, but I'm going to have 67% for green cover and 33% land use. Such is my commitment to the cause of forestation. And then let's go to post-COVID sustainable architecture. Yes, again, we need to have toilets which will have infrastructure to use recycled water or gray water for flushing tanks. This is something that we need to focus on. Neelam, please keep this in mind for your next project. Effective solid waste management and segregation of solid composting waste can be used for for restoration of mining dumps in Kudremukh and Goa. Mr. Alvarez, you moved to Goa in 1977, but my uncle used to live there and work in Chowglaze. I used to come well before 1975. Every summer holiday was spent in Goa. So I know villages which are no longer there in Goa. It's called Poira, which is no longer there thanks to the Chowglaze. Yeah, then organic solid waste management, it should become part of common property resources. So this was briefly what I wanted to speak about. Now let me go to the questions that I have for today's discussion. I need to open the file. On this occasion of World Environment Day 2021, it is perhaps time to look within. With the pandemic threatening humanity, what is it that we as responsible citizens can do to revitalize the ecology that we have ruined so wantonly? Who would like to answer this? I think it's appropriate for Mr. Alvarez. Should I repeat the question, Mr. Alvarez? He's muted. Mr. Alvarez, you're muted.
Yeah, tell me.
Okay. The question is, the question is, on this occasion of World Environment Day 2021, it is perhaps time to look within. With the pandemic threatening humanity, what is it that we as responsible citizens can do to revitalize the ecology that we have ruined so wantonly?
Well, that's a very tall demand. I don't know. As I said, the question itself has got the answer. You begin with yourself first and see what you can do As I said, first is you treat your body as a perfect ecosystem and see how you are destabilizing it. If you are eating too much of sugar, carbohydrates, and all that sort of thing, then you are obviously, if you are going to get diabetic by the age of 35 or 40. I know that urban life has got all these chocolates and these cakes and all sorts of other things that are there constantly available. And middle classes today are constantly eating morning, afternoon, evening, night. So the result is that these type of imbalances in the system are predictable. Ayurvedic system talks about specifically the balance of the doshas. And I recently, my wife had the same problem. She had some skin eruptions in the month of May. So she said, now, let me see what food that I'm eating, which is, generating heat. So she got a list out and she found out that she was eating some things like jackfruit and mango and so on. So she just removed all those things and removed many of those elements from her diet, and she was perfectly fine. The same approach is what happens in your neighborhood. Are you the source of the imbalance in your neighborhood? I mean, if you have poor people, they don't produce much garbage. But if you have rich people, they produce 50 times more garbage than a poor man. So what are you doing with that garbage? And are you looking after it properly? The period is long gone when you could say, I generate the garbage and I give it to somebody else to process. And people are going to ask you, why aren't you processing your own garbage? You produce the waste, you look after it.
That's true. The challenge is people do not, educated people refuse to convert. That is true. The educated people are the most stubborn when it comes to being eco-friendly. I agree. Uh, so shall we thank you for that, Mr. Alvarez? The next question is there any study that can point to the areas or the locations where urban environment is deteriorating rapidly? Neelam, do you have any data on this, on any contribution?
Yeah, I definitely would. Yeah, this. So I think it's again very obvious questions. I think the concrete jungles that we are putting up and the pavements that we are doing. We are paving all the areas in the urban cities, in the urban environment, and because of that, and there's hardly the forests or the green cover is completely put to it's reduced to the minimum that is required as per the standards or the bylaws. When I go for a approval of my plan, they would say, oh, in a layout only 10% is mandatory. Why are you putting 25% or 40% in your layout when only 10% is
Is
mandatory?
required.
You can get the other thing to either, and so they will ask for community amenities. And community amenities, we all know where it goes to. It goes to politicians or bureaucrats, wives, and other people who are running foundations who it will go to. So that is how it has happened there. That is one. And even if it is put under green, which is by these high profile green builders and developers and other people, it will be manicured lawns, trees imported from Singapore and Malaysia and where all. So these are the kind of trees which are water hungry lawns, and these are trees which are not indigenous to our urban environment, and they need a lot of resources. It's a waste of resources, and they don't add. The biggest point is that even after putting all these resources, they don't add to the biodiversity of the place. You don't have butterflies and bees and things around them, so it actually doesn't do what it is supposed to do. If you ask them to put a terrace garden, which I had asked, I think in 2005 to BDA, Bangalore Development Authority, to make it compulsory to have a certain number of trees in which in each plot, and we can have at least 50% of your terrace should be a garden or a vegetable garden. And these are things which were supposed to be completely made mandatory. And that have really changed the scenario, which has not happened, and it is still not happened. And with all this, we also have the problem of concrete and steel, the star building materials that are there. Nobody wants to build with bamboo and mud and waste and lime and tuna. Nobody wants to hear about them. So because of this, you become a poor architect and you become all this and this, all the other people. So if I am an architect, I'm trying to say, no, I will do like this. So, okay, you are getting 4,000 square feet project. That's the amount of footprint you can bring in a city. But if you are a cement and steel architect, you get, 2,000, I wouldn't say 2,000, I mean 20 lakh square feet building because you listen to what they say. So, however you try to do, so this something which needs to be changing, unless until that is changed, and I think Mr. Alvarez was talking about, I would coin the term ruralization. I am saying who is it, which is who is telling that urban population will much in 2050. I am telling it will go back. We will have ruralization in the next 20-30 years, and we will see that there is a reverse trend. That's what we are supposed to be doing. So who has done that? That's politicians. There's a contractors lobby, which says so many square feet needs to be constructed, so many people needs to be housed. There's another one, PM Awas Yojana. PM Awas Yojana makes mandatory for you to make a pakka house, which is not made of mud, not made of bamboo, not made of any of thatch. You have to have concrete and steel. And I have seen people in the forests of Madhya Pradesh they keep their cows and buffaloes in that house of concrete and steel because it is very hot. It needs electricity. It spoils their grains. And they get asthma living in that concrete and steel house. So it is like, and it is mandatory. You can't, the money that they give, you can't make a house with mud and bamboo with that. So all the people who live in mud and bamboo houses or thatch houses will always remain houseless in statistics or in the inventory of houseless people. They will never be called housed people. So India will never be free of this, and this is a political gimmick. We all know that. So this kacha and pakka house. So this is something which is put in the definition.
In the policy,
things need to change to take things forward in the urban environment. Even if some people want, you can't get a permission for a bamboo house. You have to word it differently. You can't get a permission for only mud house if you call it. You have to word it differently. These things have to be brought at different levels. And then we have to start from our own side, as I said. So I am living here in a mud and bamboo and a waste house, completely contemporary. 75% of my plot, which is under literally like a forest, with the bamboo and with all this around 15 types of bamboo, all kinds of fruits, all these things which I have left them to grow as they are. So this is how I am doing. I am recycling every drop of water. All my projects, I make them zero discharge in the urban environment. All of the things are recycled, and this is not today. I have been doing it from day one when I started my practice. And because thanks to that, I'm always a minority, but I don't mind. I mean, it gives me a good sleep in the night to know that I have done a good job. I'm doing what my calling is. So that is what I think I would say, that these are the areas where waste management, I think these have to become mandatory. And another thing is, mandatory is not the thing. Law is not the thing. Common man, they need to have common sense and do these things, demand these things from their developers, from these things that I want a healthy layout. Please ensure that these things are there. I will pay you 5% more, sell price in the buying price, but provide me these facilities. Are there people who will be ready to do that? So these are some things I think I just wanted to.
That is very interesting. To practice what you preach is the call of destiny and the call of your conscience, and you have put it very well. It's not, you don't come across many architects or many builders today who are willing to go by this. I think we need to make it a policy definition that you need to, because India, according to scientific estimates, should have 33% forest cover. for the size of India subcontinent. So that we should try to, because deforestation is such a reality and restoration of forestation has become such a problem in the public space today. We as conscientious citizens have to, and in any case in the post-COVID era, we have to make it a point to have 33% forest cover or green cover even within private land or private land holdings in urban or rural areas. And if we do that in rural areas as well, we will be able to mainstream rural people and people from population from the hinterland into mainstream urban economy without moving there. That's very essential. And now shall we go to the next question I have? That will be, how can we restore urban ecology, including wetlands and wildlife? I think Neelam will be able to do, or maybe perhaps I myself will be able to answer that if you permit me.
Yeah, fine. I've slightly covered it already, so maybe you can go ahead.
See, like Neelam says, if you can plant multi-cropping or multiple varieties of bamboo in her own private land, and that's because she's a bamboo advocate. I myself, when I said I have a plot of land where I'm building my house, the land plinth area will be 33%, and 67% of the land area is going to be green cover. That I will be planting a lot of fruit and flower-bearing trees and creepers as well. I want to make a walking path in my own house, in my plot of land, so to say. Then you need to restore, wetlands in urban areas. The land sharks are the biggest threat in urban areas. Then you have, like you say, the contract lobby. Why do you want to give more setbacks? They ask you. They will talk of floor space ratio, and they say, no, we have to have. Why do you want to give setbacks? Engineering, like you said, the concrete lobby of engineers, they refuse to. They want to commercialize every inch of space. Mr. Alvarez was mentioning Bangalore in a very derisive way. But Mr. Alvarez, I'm very happy to say I live in a place called Basavanagudi, which is the oldest part of Bangalore. And I live with my parents. This is a large plot of land, okay, but we have 9 fruit-bearing trees, 2 lawns, and we have about 20 flowering trees and plants. And are the big plants, which are more or less like trees, huge hibiscus trees. And I have, including a snake, I had squirrels, I have 35 bulbuls, and I have all this in my house garden. And I even had a slender loris. Some 25 years ago, when my grandfather died, I asked the forest department to plant a Pride of India tree in front of my house, in front of the gate, in memory of my grandfather, because he taught me writing skills. And thanks to him, today I'm a successful journalist. So in his memory, I planted the Pride of India tree. It's called Legistromia lanceolata, if I'm not mistaken. And that tree has become a 1-tree bird sanctuary. I'm so proud to say this, though it's on public land on the footpath, and everybody who wants to cut it, they come in, they antagonize me, and my blood pressure shoots up, and I have a bad day quarreling with them. But that's how you need to, and we can restore urban areas by propagating in-memory parks. Everybody has, like Buddha said, every family has suffered one death. So we need to plant 1 tree per year on their death anniversary. Or if you had somebody who has died, unfortunately, in mysterious or criminal circumstances or whatever, then in their memory, for the sake of peace of the immediate family, we should make a park. In memory, Shanti parks. That will create so much peace. Then we need to do agroforestry in whichever fallow land we have to create agroforestry that will mitigate rural malnutrition, and it will create bird sanctuaries in every area. All of these is 1 acre plots for agroforestry. So in every village, we can do it in India. That is as far as rural area is concerned. In urban areas, I'm very particular about restoring wetlands for the sake of microclimate conservation. And then we need to reverse industrial revolution to make it sustainable, livelihood-based economy at a household level. We need to go back to cottage economy level so that we can reverse the industrial revolution and the pollution and the crimes that it comes with. That is as far as restoration is concerned. Then wildlife, urban wildlife. I had a snake in my house, a cobra, and it had dwelt in my house because I have this massive garden. It was living and burrowing. It's still, there are burrows under my father's house even now. And so much for the foundation. Neelam, you might freak out at me, but this is a solid concrete house built in 1976-77. 2 feet thick walls. But look at the amount. You can see I have no artificial light. All this is from the window light that I'm getting. That is such is the cross ventilation we have, such is the lighting we have. I'm so grateful. The amount of trees and green cover we have inside our plot of land. I'm so utterly grateful to that. So this is one thing I can do. We can do as a for urban restoration. We need to also in terms of COVID architecture. We need to come again. Yes.
Can I
interrupt? Yes, please tell me.
Can I add one point in this? You talked about the bylaws. Yeah, I talked about the bylaws and the setback in the houses. See, these in the beginning, they were put for trees to be put. Exactly. Actually, you're supposed to put trees in the setbacks that you have. Now, in the COVID era, when people ask me how to, what to do in the urban environment. See, if you would have planted those trees between two houses, and these trees would have filtered and brought the oxygen that comes out and things like that. That would have filtered some amount of infection from one house to the other. It would have prevented. Similarly, from the road also, people build right up to the road. I mean, they're supposed to give a setback so that the dust, one car goes and you have the dust which comes right into your nose from there. If you are absolutely building right up to the, your boundary of the plot. These are some things with in urban areas everyone does, which is pathetic actually. It was supposed to be for garden and plants and things to filter the pollution, to filter infections and things like that, and of course green the environment, which people have
taken for granted.
Setback was introduced in the first place. Yeah.
So that was very sad. That is how urban the setbacks are misused. The setback and bylaws are used more in the breach or implemented more in the breach, especially in areas like boomtown towns like Bangalore, where the immigrant population have come for better economic and livelihood options. We are not making it. In fact, I would rather take livelihoods to the hinterland. Where so people can stay there and work as cottage industry. Work from home is today a reality. It will be a reality in the coming decade. So we have to make the rural population inclusive in the economy by giving them cottage industry opportunities in their own place, for them to work from home. So that way we will reverse the blessed industrial revolution, try to make it more sustainable and a rural based economy. I think that is very, very important. I think that's a takeaway from today's interaction. Next question I have are what are the tenets to be used for post-COVID-19 era? I would request Neelam to speak after me. I just have 1 minute to add here. For a post-COVID-19 era, I think we need to have minimum of maximum of 3 people in a room, and they should each have 2 meters distance between each other. If there are 3 people, then it should be a triangular space for people to sit. 2 arms length has to be there. There should be cross ventilation. There should be natural lighting, air, windows, and fresh air and fresh natural light. These are the tenets to be followed, in my opinion. But for this, if you have to have larger space, we need to go for more viable means of construction like rammed earth, bamboo-based architecture, and I'm not very much for recycling plastic into construction, but maybe you have better practical inputs there to add, Neelam. But I would really advocate for lateritic rock, but though it's not entirely endemic to Bangalore, but lateritic rock, and it can be spared GST because it's a rural product. So you can consider transport as a cost against GST there. A lateritic rock, rammed earth, bamboo, and then you can have what else as earthen material. You can have adobe. Then you can have the other thing is carbon wattle. And I would love to have an entirely bamboo house if it is safe. But I stand to be corrected and enlightened more about this. Neelam, over to you about this post-COVID-19 era architecture.
I think we have to look at the basic requirement of a house. Why do we have a house? And how much do we need? And if that is addressed, so I would say for simple living, one is that how much area do you really need, and what all kind of facilities you need in a house. So basically, a house construction or building construction was done for security from the animals, wildlife in the beginning, and then the climate and other things that were supposed to, we are supposed to get shelter from there. So if we try to remember the basic requirement why shelter came in the first place, I think we would always be on the right track. That is number one. And number two, if we build with something which is absolutely local to you and which nature gives from around your area, one can consider a few kilometers or maybe maximum 50 to 100 kilometers around you, if you can think about that. Because even if we talk about bamboo, and if bamboo is transported from South America to build in Bangalore, it is definitely not sustainable. Even if it is brought from as big as far as northeast, and then also it is not exactly very sustainable.
I have
Again, if bamboo is again done lot of value addition, it is so polished, and all these kind of things are done to it, it is not sustainable.
I have a question.
Which is like, I'm really sorry to be using this speaking, is that we have in Europe and America, there's a lot of demand of bamboo, but not of bamboo round pole, because the culprit in anything, including building material, is processing. Because people like processed and more processed. The more processed you are, the more civilized you are called, and the more expensive your material is. And in processing, we need all these natural resources and things like that. So the moment you start processing something to make a very fine product, that's where unsustainability creeps in. And that is the crux of the matter in architecture, or whether you're making a car or making a product. Processing is the key, and this is something which is a byproduct of the industrial revolution. They did not have anything much of the ecology and environment with them. They had mines and things, and they started in industry to mine and sell these metals and things to the world, and processing started from there. And this processing is the main culprit, in Barcelona. Yeah, even in Barcelona, see, I was in a hotel and I asked them that there's no drinking water in the room, and they told me, they laughed at me, as such they keep laughing at Asians and Indians and people like that. And so they said our toilet water is potable. Wow, why do you need to process your toilet water to drinking capacity? You don't. So processing is the thing which is the key. So if you want a guide, one-line guide as to what has to be done, least processed materials to be used in your construction, in your daily life, you will be sustainable, and our natural resources will be saved to a large extent. All everywhere. Bali bamboo houses by Green School, they are famous. John Hardy and Cynthia Hardy. You know how much processing goes into it? And you know the cost of those houses? 20,000 rupees a square feet. Can you think about it? And why is that? Because they process and process and they process. They are for millionaires and billionaires. And the whole bamboo world is talking about that bamboo house. Nobody wants to talk about a bamboo house that we will build, which is 1,500, 2,000 rupees a square feet, and very solid, good construction. Nobody wants to talk about that. They don't fetch much public. I don't get CNN interviews because I don't subscribe to those things. I don't get BBC interviews because I don't subscribe to processing. I'm fine with it. Absolutely fine with it. So I am trying to get a vocabulary of architecture, and I profess it, I practice it, which can be done with 2-3 materials which are available very widely. Mud on your own site, bamboo. Every city and town in India has got a bamboo bazaar with round bamboos. Waste, which all the modern human beings and everybody is producing. So that waste needs to be recycled and put in some manner where not much energy is utilized to recycle. That's another thing. And minimize waste in the first place. Use your own water. Use the sun, which is free on your site. Use the air, which is free on your site. All this nature has given us free. Use it. Use all these free things which nature has given you. If you follow this, you will never be wrong. This is my way of practicing architecture. This is how I do.
That's very interesting. I have two questions. One, you're right about reversing the industrial revolution, even in the architectural field or the construction field. Another thing you said about the bathroom water in Spain, in Barcelona, all over Europe, because of EU laws, they need that is standardized, best practice. Water everywhere is potable, whether it's in the toilet or the wash sink in front of the toilet or anywhere or in the hotel. And one more thing, they commercialize it. You want bottled water in the hotel room, they will charge you for the second bottle, or second half liter. That's the problem there. That's where there is the problem. And coming back to bamboo as an architecture, you mean to say you can use the yellow bamboo that's available in Bamboo Bazaar in Bangalore? Now, I was given to believe that I have to get it imported all the way from the north.
There are certain, there are many varieties of bamboo which are available in Karnataka, and similarly all over the country. They are available even in Gujarat. They are available even in Madhya Pradesh in the hot areas.
Okay.
The kind of architecture that you do with the material has to be as per the climate. In Bangalore, we can't live in all bamboo house. There has to be a way, and there is the traditional wisdom in this case, which has seen thousands of years of how to build, how much to use, where to use.
Okay.
We think I'm not telling this is copy pasting. I'm telling using it because you need a thermal mass, you need all those things. Those things have to be considered. And that's how you have to build. Anything, there is no one solution. Every site is different. Every project is different. This is not cut and paste solution that you have one solution done by one industry like a car produced and it can be cut pasted everywhere across the country or across the world. Natural materials you can't use in that way. The architect has to be sensitive. The people have to be sensitive also to know what is the limit of that material and demand only that much.
Okay.
It's not just the architect, it's also the client.
Yes.
No successful building can be made in any kind of manner, sustainable or whatever, unless there is a synergy between the client, the execution person, the builder or contractor, and the architect together. It's a teamwork.
Yes.
Without teamwork, you cannot do it. It's not possible.
Right. And I think I have a couple of more questions. What are the measures and incentives needed on urban ecological restoration from an architectural point of view? Neelam?
I think I've spoken quite a bit. I think there's the biggest advantage that you have is that you have a healthy house and a healthy building. What more can you want in an era of COVID and post-COVID thing? If you have a house which is healthy, that's what you need. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. And also natural light, ventilation makes you happy. Just looking at your garden makes you happy. Looking at sun makes you happy. A very basic question one has to ask, and again, it's a common sense. When you are stressed in a problem, would you go to a closed room, concrete room, or will you go to a park if you want peace and find a solution? It's a very basic question every human being should ask. Where do we need to go? Where do we go when we want peace? Because our DNA, we are made of these 5 elements, which resonates and balances itself once you go out in nature.
Yeah, it's so true. Mr. Alvarez also like...
I mean, that is, even a small child knows that. You don't need to teach. You don't need to teach anybody. You don't need to say it into a big thing. But yeah, I mean, this is so true. This is so true.
True.
We know that we have not changed. And we will not change, because where is this human body made from? Nature. Where is your cloth comes from? Nature. Where is your material comes from? Nature. What do we have other than nature with us? Nothing. We are nothing. And if we don't respect and restore that, we can't be healthy. All this COVID is like all this global warming, all this is because nature will heal itself. Nothing will happen to nature. They are saying save Earth. No, save Earth. Forget about it. You save yourself. That's enough. Earth will heal itself. It doesn't need to be healed. It will heal itself. We have to look after, as Mr. Alvarez was talking, start from your body. We have to think about ourselves.
Exactly
And
what Mr. Alvarez was saying.
Building which
he was
makes
saying,
you happy
yeah,
will be with natural light, natural ventilation, all these kind of things. Yeah.
Mr. Alvarez also would like to contribute
I
to this question.
think we can proceed further. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Alvarez. Yeah,
Input
we've
from
been
Mr.
quiet for a
Alvarez
long time. I would like, yeah.
to proceed. Okay, Mr. Alvarez, would you like to contribute just 1 minute maybe about urban ecological restoration in terms of architecture or space? We were talking about you should have space for pranayama, so that's why I asked you. Please answer briefly.
Well, you have to do pranayam early in the morning in any urban environment because by 10 o'clock, all dust particles are in the air. There's very little chance of you doing very good.
Yeah.
You will be taking more and more of these effluents into your system rather than doing anything good for you. So many of those things, Ayurveda told us you do it at 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, because that's the time to do it when it's possible to do it. City life, forecloses all these options. So you really got to do, as I said, get up very early. If you want to eat good organic food, you can't get it in cities. You get, mostly branded stuff. You get many of these things are a serious problem in cities. And I don't think you can struggle a lot. I mean, what Neelam says is correct. You can try within your own sphere to be as natural as possible, to follow natural principles, to do a proper, recycling of everything. But there is a limit to how much you can do natural recycling and how much you can really learn from nature, because you are not in the presence of nature. You are in the presence of an artificial construct in which you are living, because you are part of a housing estate, or you are part of some gated community, or you are part of this or part of that, or whatever it is. That itself has cut you off from the real world, from real life circulation of air and water, and from groundwater, and from relationship with groundwater, and so many things.
Okay.
I'm not saying that these are limiting options. I don't live there, so I don't really have any solutions for those type of situations.
Okay. Then what are the materials needed for restoration of urban ecology? Let us try to focus on, say, bamboo as a construction material. It has recently been revised it has recently received government of India approval as a construction material. Any comments, Neelam?
It's not been approved as a construction material also even now properly across the thing, because it has got its own schedule of rates, so it has to come through that. I'm very happy to share that from Bamboo Society of India, we have made a steering committee. I am the chairman of the Karnataka chapter, and we have made a national body of within Bamboo Society of India for architecture and design to mainstream bamboo in the construction. I'm heading the committee.
Mm-hmm.
And we have signed a historic MOU with Council of Architecture to put it into the curriculum of the architecture and design colleges. And in Karnataka, we are in talks with the university people who are in the BOS Board of Studies for civil engineering, and we also looking at design. All three disciplines to be brought under this thing to put bamboo in the curriculum. That is one thing. And we will be putting a lot of emphasis on advocacy and research connected to the real life situations and in our country, rather than what's happening across the world or in हमारे कंट्री के लिए खुद चाहिए पहले, हमारे अपने लोगों के लिए चाहिए पहले, बाकी लोग को अपना वो they have lot of options. We have to first look at, and what is little sad is everyone is talking about exporting stuff to other countries to increase the economical income, the income of the bamboo communities and things like that, which is very sad. Because what will happen then again, bamboo communities people, they will not live in bamboo houses. They will not use bamboo for their daily lives. They will sell them for money and again go back to the unsustainable life, which is not what it was started in the beginning for. We had started looking for mud, bamboo and all this to have a healthier living environment for the masses and the new buildings that we are going to construct in our country first. And that I think should be the focus. And that is something which is slightly, lopsided, because anyone who puts a processing industry of bamboo is really championed, and anyone who is looking at low cost, I hate that term low cost house, cost effective housing, or we can say these, and I sustainable houses or simple houses. Anyone who looks at that is looked down upon even now, even by the government agencies. Now, how do you alter this kind of situations? Unless until the government policies get it right about a kacha house and pakka house. Without that, it will not have any effect. So it has to go into the BIS, Bureau of Indian Standards. It has to go into the National Building Code. It has to go into the curriculum. It has to have advocacy. And now I'm very happy to say there are lots of architects now wanting to know. Yeah, because when I started in 1999, I was the only architect in the country. Before me, we had Vinu Kale, who had done a lot of work in bamboo sector, and he left his practice in Bombay and he moved to Varda, where he has done more than 50 buildings. Not one has been documented, because they never think it is important to document bamboo buildings. It's as simple as that. There's no respect of the buildings with mud and bamboo. So he died in 1998. I could not meet him. I started in 1999 working specifically with bamboo. At that time, I was the only architect and bumping into every client, and nobody wanted to build with it. But today, the situation is quite different. And we have at least about 20-30 people in our country who are willing to take up bamboo as a material in their construction, in their designs and things like that. And I think with the curriculum, once we put it, it will go forward. The only thing is we have to see that the Bali style one and the European style does not come to our country. It will come. It has to be restricted. And it has to be brought to the notice of the people, because everyone wants a Bali house or wo finish chahte hain. When you want to give them for 2,000 rupees square feet, and then they get dissatisfied. अरे bamboo house ऐसा होता है, तो बाली ऐसा होना चाहिए था. तो बाली के लिए वो 20,000 रुपए चाहिए ना, 20,000 rupees चाहिए. वो देने को आप तैयार हैं क्या? और जरूरत भी नहीं है. So this is something which needs to people to understand, and this can make even mud and bamboo can make a very contemporary house. I did not make any presentation today because the topic wasn't health today, but I have a house which is upmarket house with mud and bamboo in a very contemporary sense, with a shell roof with bamboo and other things, and mud blocks I have used, and I used a lot of greenery, and I have used light. It's called the House of Five Elements. And I'm sitting here right now. As you can see, this is so much of ample light. I have no ceiling fan in my house. Even living in Bangalore, there are no ceiling fans except in bedrooms. The whole area which is there, and I have a courtyard. I have a toti in the courtyard. All these things I have done, and this is possible. I shaved myself to showcase to the world that mud and bamboo is also a respectable material. It doesn't meet thatch and this kind of a thing when you think of bamboo and mud. So that change has to happen. Yeah.
Is bamboo architecture or construction earthquake resilient or safe, earthquake safe? Can it absorb the seismic shock?
Yes, but bamboo has to be used in a particular way to make that, because sheer buildings with bamboo are earthquake prone, and in earthquake prone areas you will be surprised to know that is the way construction was done. So ऐसा नहीं है कि हम bamboo को हमने अभी invent किया है. It is a very traditional and long time people have been using it, and people are quite intelligent. I know I have seen bamboo communities, people who have so much of technical know-how. And I'm using the word technical because this is actually technical. They don't have certificates. But then we are supposed to recognize the prior learning that they have of several generations. And another most important thing, they touch the material. When you touch a material, you know what the material can do to you. You can't sit in an air-conditioned office and just put on the computer and say, okay, go and construct this building. You can't construct these kind of buildings like that. You have to be on the ground, you have to be on the site, and you have to guide. And you have to learn. Biggest thing, I have learned a lot from my artisans. I mean, they are my gurus, almost like I call them my gurus. But this is something which is only a person who does a PhD in 5 years becomes a doctor. What about a person who has spent 10 generations learning bamboo, working with bamboo? What about what certificate are we going to give it to him? Nobody wants to know that, and they are called illiterate people. No, we are illiterate.
It has only
We have very
value.
limited knowledge. They have the knowledge.
That's true.
You need to do that. I mean, it's a long discussion. I think we are little running out of time. So
Is it? Okay, I have 3 more
maybe
questions.
yeah,
but,
you can
if you're running
focus on health and yeah.
Yeah, there may be a question from the audience as well.
Yeah.
I think one question was there.
Yeah, we have five questions are there, and please take it.
Good
I think
morning.
that will
Kindly
be
put
good.
questions from Payment. Good morning. Okay, then I don't. There was somebody who had asked something about. I think it came in the WhatsApp chat.
Yes, yeah.
No, there was somebody who said.
Yeah, 5 questions are there.
How to build
They
natural.
had sent.
Yeah, maybe you can take over here yourself. Taking advantage of government.
I think we have already answered, so we'll move to the next question.
Yeah. I think incentives. There's one person who says, how can we make people motivated to do a shift to eco-friendly buildings? Harini S in Bangalore. But I think that's a very good question. How to incentivize financially or fiscally? But the very fact that it's so cost effective will make it. I'm being very adventurous. I'm going to build my house in 24 lakhs. It's going to be an earthen house with rammed earth and bamboo, and
I want to know. No. What more do you want? Your health is the incentive.
Yeah.
Healthy environment is the incentive. What more incentive do you want?
Can you use
what more incentive do you want? Nothing by the government. I can tell you, nothing by the government will or by any authority will change things. We have to think. We have to think.
Yeah.
And take a conscious decision.
Can you use invasive wood like, say, Parthenium or the weed, lantana wood? It is now, in fact, the NGOs have been given contracts by the Forest Department to clear the forest of lantana. Can the lantana wood be used for construction, at least for pillars maybe or something like that?
No. It's a weed basically. How could it be? It's not even a wood really.
But lantana wood, I'm told, is used. Kindly enlighten me.
I don't know. I mean, wood, when you talk about a tree. Lantanas are basically bushes which grow in the undergrowth.
Only that will suffice.
Maybe compacting it as once you get this waste, you can make it into briquettes or compacted, make it into particle boards or whatever.
Yeah, boards. They make it into boards.
There's a huge amount of biomass.
Boards or something.
It's a lot of biomass available for the particular purpose.
What can an individual do for society to become more environmentally aware?
Can be made.
To be more environmentally aware, please read. Please internalize the whatever the thought is in the discussion, and please put to use in the Northeast. This is a question from Manipur. So please use local material like bamboo, and if you have lateritic rock, please use those in construction. And then please use recycled grey water to flush tanks, and then you how to water the trees. And what else can you do? You can also grow your own herbs or your kitchen garden and utilize them. You can if you make a good, very effective separation of solid waste from synthetic waste to solid organic waste. The organic waste has to be compiled and collected and become a common property resource for the society. It should be used for restoring mulch. Plastics, if separated effectively, can have high calorific value. It can be used to lay national highways and the construction of concrete roads. So these are the ways you can start small, Miss Tilotama. I think her name is Tilotama. Kangjam
I think
Tilotama.
maybe Mr. Alvarez will have something to add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, can we have Mr. Alvarez add to that a little? To become
No,
more
not really.
environmentally aware, you know, what
Well,
can an
I'm
individual
not.
do to?
I'm not the one
Yeah,
for
sir.
asking more courses and all that to be done, because environment studies and all these things have become quite a burden for students. They become an additional subject for them, additional exams and so on. And it's really making environment, love for the environment, actually a drudgery, which is not at all, what we expected. But building environment, you see, you first take children out of the environment and put them in these concrete blocks. And Neelam, I'm in sympathy with many of the things that you have said. You take children out first from the natural environment, put them into concrete blocks, call them schools. Then you want them to build a love for the environment. How it is possible? In Tagore's Shantiniketan,
Yeah.
you, to gain admission, I remember, you had to first climb, you show that you could climb the tree that was at the gate in front of Shantiniketan. Only after that you could gain admission. Which youngster knows how to climb trees nowadays in Bangalore or whatever it is? They don't know, because their parents tell them don't go up the tree because you'll break your bones. We broke bones, we broke teeth falling from trees and so on. But that's all part of being part of nature and appreciating, and taking a mango from a tree and eating it is different from what you will get in a bazaar after it has gone through all those chemicals.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it is something.
Yes.
I keep insisting, you have to expose children to the environment as it is, and the best what we know of the environment in its best possible way. That is, if you go through sanctuaries or national parks, or even if you go to your great Bagh in Bangalore,
Lal Bagh.
this Lal Bagh. I mean, it is so beautiful in many ways, and you get that experience, and only then you get that love. Otherwise, you can't get it by reading books and by going through more coursework, or by going on the internet or whatever it is. That it may be, it's always somewhere far away. Unless you get yourself immersed in it, like schools introducing a whole regime of earthworm cultivation and bringing earthworms back. I have not found a single child who is not interested in earthworms. If you give children to work with earthworms, they become delirious. They are so enthusiastic about it. Chickens, ducks, birds, geese. Why do we deprive children of all these things? We say, no, this has got nothing to do with their education. That's all their environment. It's all the living things. It's the bees, the butterflies, the birds. Why don't we have beehives in each school? What's the problem? I don't see what the problem is. I mean, bees are not going to ask you to come and make the honey. They know how to do it. But all these things are no-go. Anything living is no-go. Anything to do with earthworms is no-go. Anything to do with snakes is no-go. What type of environment awareness can you create after that? You already destroyed the sense of environment in children by taking them out and putting them in these boxes. I'm saying, why can't you get back out of, you're saying go back, also to rural areas.
Yeah.
Why don't we begin with also with the children having the schools in Lal Bagh or so many other places, open classes, at least some portion, your botany lecture, your lecture on environmental science, everything can be held in these places rather than in your concrete blocks.
That's true. That's
for which you architects have designed.
No. There is a revolution in thought, architectural thought, I must say. And it's a matter of propagating and popularizing either earthen material architecture, or it will come. COVID is going to necessitate that, or even bamboo architecture. It's a matter of propagation so that we enlighten the masses. My parents' generation, who built this house in the mid-70s, did not know about earthen architecture, or they would definitely have gone in for it. But I made up my mind. It's either rammed earth and bamboo, or no, nothing at all. So for me, I'm steadfast and very passionate about it. I'm just looking forward to, having 67% of greenery and 33% of land, where I'm going to live with my huge retinue of dogs and cats and birds. But anyway, today I think we have covered all the subjects we needed to cover. Perhaps there's one more question. Let me just see. is there a scope for human and wildlife to coexist in the urban area in, say, an environment where you have 33% green area, green cover in urban areas? Is it possible to cohabit with wildlife? I think it's possible. Or am I being very idealistic? Because I have,
See,
tell me.
4.5 acre, it's a 4.5 acre layout. I have made it. I purchased the land. There was nobody around here for quite a long time, and I purchased this plot, and then I got a layout made. And I have put around, there's a park in the middle, which is more than 1 acre, so 25% goes to the park. Each house and all other things with all landscape combined, and terrace garden, I have made it compulsory. 50% of the terraces compulsory, all to have green, even in the apartments and in the villas. And with all this, the villas and apartments are under construction, but the park was made much before the developers stepped in. We have wild rabbits in this much itself, and we have water birds. We have at least 20-30 varieties of butterflies, and we have squirrels, and we have this papiha, what we call, a lot of them. They wake me up in the morning. We have birds. We have all these kind of snakes, and snakes we never kill them. We either rehabilitate them somewhere else or like that. We never kill them. We have learned to live with all this. 4.5 acres land. From 2002, I have been wilding it. There are a lot of layouts that have come here, but the moment somebody enters my layout, they say the whole ambience. And the other day, one Swiggy guy came and he says, "ये तो जंगल में आ गए हम क्या यहाँ पे?" So you can do it. Wildlife, you can try to create even the small layouts and things, and we are putting a whole bylaws that people will not be destroying these trees. And we have a lot of fruit trees, mango trees, all these kind of trees, and we have I have put this keystone species, which is a lot of these people tree and other things which will have a lot of these flora and fauna that will be there. So this is possible to do it, but you have to have the will. I had to really fight with my developer. I still fighting because they keep destroying my trees one time or the other, and I have to write them a note that I have spent so many years, 16 years, 17 years in growing this tree, and this is the amount of water that was used. This is the amount of oxygen it would have given. If you're destroying one tree, this is what happens. So I have to keep doing this over and over again. It's almost like a push on a daily or twice week basis, but I am at it, and I really want to see that this happens here. So with that, I am able to get a green area almost equal to the
Built up area.
4.5 acres that I had in the beginning. So the total area, including all the step terraces, this, that, all that, and to the plot area, the virgin plot area that I had. So it is possible, but yes, you have
the will for that.
I think Malini, we should close the
wind up now because we've really exceeded the time. I think half an hour or 45 minutes have we exceeded the time.
Yeah.
But it's been an extremely interesting interaction, and I'm utterly grateful for the insights shared here. Mr. Alvarez, thank you so much for such an inspiration.
Okay.
Welcome.
Malini, I will take it. Thank you so much invigorating talk and also the moderating of the session for you to conduct all the sessions. Now, as Mr. Alvarez was telling, this is the biggest awareness campaign, World Environment Day. I take it as a campaign launched by the United Nations in the early 70s. And it is that time of the year when civil societies and environmentalists, school students and global leaders just take a moment to reflect upon the impact of human activity on Mother Earth. And with the climate crisis making some irreversible changes to our lives as we know it, this is also the time to think about unique, workable solutions that can help in resolving issues that we discussed so much about forestation, plastic pollution, and all that. Reimagine, recreate, This is the year's theme for World Environment Day for today. The human population must lifestyle that can help restore the natural order of things. I think that's what we started with Mr. Claude, and I think all of us have gone into a very personal journeys of how we have tried to do it. So it's like a single man. That's what the whole thing is about. Every human being has to have that awareness and has to go work towards it. Be it banning a single-use plastic or infusing more green and reimagine ways to help Mother Earth heal ourselves. I thank out their valuable time in this difficult era of COVID-19 and share their valuable insights with all of us. Thank you, Mr. Claude, and thank you, Miss Marini. Sorry for that. Last year, all our simple talks, they were hosted with Dalbagh Education Institute, deemed University, Agra, as our institutional partners. This year again, we started our second season of Simple Talks as part of our campaign, Action for Simple Living. Because for me, simplicity is akin to sustainability. The sustainability is the most abused term today. Everyone does everything and then washes it with the term sustainability. So I thought of doing it in a simplicity probably is more appropriate is what I feel. And again, the Dalbagh Education Institute has come forward to host the talks with us this year. I thank Professor Dr. Prem Kalra, Director DEI, and Architect Molly Caprihan, and Architect Piyush of the Department of Architecture for participating and partnering as our institutional partners and co-hosting the session. I also thank all of you participants for actively participating in the webinar with extreme enthusiasm. This is our first webinar on the Faculty of Earth, and our next set of webinar and even the posts on social media will address the issue of agricultural biodiversity. Stay tuned for our announcements on social media and our website. Stay healthy, stay happy, and have a great weekend ahead. Thank you all and namaskar. Thank you so much. Thank you, Malini.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Claude. Thank you so much.